able to stay or come in and out throughout the day, we would love to have you. It's Friday the 13th, it's storming, it's kind of perfect to talk about disunity and destruction. So without further ado, Dr. Porter is going to introduce our first panel.
Let's see if I can eschew the microphone as well. Is everyone in here? Okay. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this event and this special session dedicated to the work of a group of undergraduate students guided by graduate student Rod Sachs, for which I've been asked to provide a bit of context before they begin. So this past fall, Rod invited all 45 students in his 2 English 1302 courses to volunteer for a digital humanities service learning project. The primary contribution would be to cultivate the living legacy of several underrepresented scholars and advocates of people of color by creating a mediation in public discourse, which is a communication skill that 1302 pledges to accomplish, and 7 of those students responded. So the result was the forming of the ID-Link team, which is part of the D-Archive collaboration, an international community of decolonial artists and scholars, which documents, edits, and curates the lectures, performances, and public interventions of the Decolonial Summer School, Middelburg, which has been hosted in the Netherlands since 2010. Now, naturally enough, the ID-Link team practices delinking, right? The enacting of decolonial options as alternatives to mainstream neoliberalism. In order to do what? To unveil systems that dehumanize and to resist ideologies that lead to the harming of life. Right? To further that goal, the ID-Link team employs digital humanities and decolonial body politics, that is, body art, to open spaces for peaceful discussions, whether virtual, digital, or interpersonal dialogue, of the Westerner's ethical responsibility within the anthropocentric disaster zone, as we shall see. Now, more particularly, the ID-Link team began work on the interpretation of an art object, a mural, designed in part to honor the life and work of longtime Chicana lesbian scholar, human rights activist, and popular educator, Dr. Maria Lugones of SUNY Binghamton. Now, the mural was meant to be a signpost, an act of embodiment, offering various interpretations, connections, and processes of lived experience that take seriously by trying to enact or to practice to live insights from decolonialism, material feminism, post-humanism, environmentalism, and other theoretical perspectives. Therefore, the board, the students, and the following performance serve as a mediation between non-Western scholars, such as Maria Lugones, and those who are unfamiliar with her work, and her specific audience, who she describes as white folk. And so a final note before the presentation proper begins. While some students have agreed to take the risk of self-identification in the public discussion of issues related to white violence or environmental and social justice, the undergraduates present may or may not decide that such a risk is safe for them to take. Right? For this reason, the ID-Link team may use cosmetic or other devices and filming practices to protect their identities, right, without silencing their voices. So they kindly ask the audience to respect their rights by not making any recordings, photographic, video, audio, of their presentation without having already made prior arrangements to do so. Now I'll turn it over to them.
Thanks, Dr. Porter. And thanks to all of you for showing up. This is wonderful, especially to see some familiar friends. Can you all hear me? I usually have a pretty strong voice. It's great. So the first thing I'd like to do is just ask you, please, for thick skin. You may hear some things today that really jar your senses of what is culturally appropriate or what is normal for you. And I'd like to start just by calming the nerves down a little bit and ask for an attempt to enter a space where the ideas and the thoughts that you have as who you are can enter a liminal space. And I know that the board is difficult to see from where you're sitting. So I want to invite you to come up to the board, to leave your seat, and come up and stand in front of it and look at it at a specific time, not right now. But there's really too much information on the board to be able to go through in a quick manner. But so what we're going to focus on are 4 stages that lead to awareness, and then a 7-step process of transformation within those stages. And then we'll hear from our student collaborators who are going to be embodying some of the authors that we are drawing our material from. And we'll explain as we go why there's this sheet there. But without further ado, let's hear from Maria de Gomez.
After 40 years of working on racism and bringing the lived experience of people of color to white people, I have found that my work has made no difference because there is no mediation between my work and white people that makes them hear and see and embody the oppression of life.
So, what Maria is sharing here in our act of listening to her is that after 40 years of working on bringing racism to our attention, thank you, Maria, the lived experience of studying whiteness has made no difference. This is what she has said in class. And this is why she is repeating this here. And after she said that, she said the reason for this is because there is no mediation. To bring the knowledge, my knowledge, the knowledge that I have spent 40 years studying how to end racism, there's no mediation to bring that to who she calls white folk. And white folk represents people who bear the markers of the Western society. They may not be white in skin color or ethnicity, but they practice Western practices. Now, there's, like I said, too much information. So what I'd like to do is briefly scroll through the 4 stages, just to let your eyes see them, and the 7 steps of transformation. So it'd be kind of like a definition of terms. And as I teach, I always try to include music that accompanies the occasion. So we have stage 1, identify assumptions. Stage 2, cognitive vision. Stage 3, transformation. Stage 4, cognitive resonance. And then we have 7 A's of transformation. So when we identify our assumptions, we're unveiling origins of behavior. With aesthesis, we are freeing rigid minds by appealing to the senses, that is, liberating the intellect. Apoptosis, apoptosis literally means cellular DNA generation and regeneration. So you're breaking down the DNA that surrounds your thoughts. Nemesis means remembering what you know. In other words, you have knowledge, but there's something that's happening that's preventing you from remembering it. And this is a tricky one. Autopoiesis. It's a biological term from a Chilean biologist that means recovering or creating what is necessary and sufficient for autonomy. The unity of multiple material potential entities that become awareness in consciousness. And that would be an ethical living praxis with beings, host humans and non-humans, and that brings us to our topic today. How are we surviving the storm? We're going to suggest that along with being able to identify processes of behavior that damage people in yourself, that you can form alliances with people, coalitions of trust, using these processes and steps. So what I want to do now for you is, and I'm dying of dry mouth, so I'm going to take a quick water break here. Grab two. So what we're going to do is quickly run you through those 4 stages and 7 steps. But before we do that, I want to introduce the process of identifying our assumptions. And while we do that, we're going to hear from Paulo Freire. Okay, Paulo.
When people lack a critical understanding of the reality, apprehending it in fragments which they do not perceive as interacting constituent elements of a whole, they cannot truly know that reality. To truly know it, they would have to reverse their starting point. They would need to have a total vision of the context in order to subsequently to separate and isolate its constituent elements, and by means of this analysis, achieve a clearer perception of the whole.
Alfredo, if you were living, I would want to hug you and thank you. Thank you for bringing your knowledge to our attention. What he's talking about is being able to identify and break apart and break into components the constituent elements of our society. And so this is the work of Aníbal Quijano. What you're looking at is this frame, this form, is by Aníbal Quijano. And he developed this idea of looking at the West by a kind of formulation of matrices that are impenetrable, and as someone that is coming to it as an outsider. And so what I've done is I've allowed myself to dwell with this material. I've identified where my authority came from as I grew up, how I related to the economy, what was my knowledge base, how am I categorized as a human being, and what is my relationship to nature. And so what we've done is, or what I did is I created an art object to express over 150 different sources from my dissertation, and put it all on board on a cognitive map to be able to see it and interact with it. But then I was tasked with the question, can I teach this? Can I teach these steps? And how, in what way will my students be allowed to interact with this material? And how can they participate in the contestation of these things, but also in a way that protects their identity? And we're going to get to why that is absolutely necessary. So on we go with our explanation. So, one of the factors that we're looking against is the binaries that are created. And so when I mentioned entering into liminality, that is a space, a liminal space of being in between two things, or more than two things. And so I feel like an individual that has been caught between entities that I have really no control of developing. But the problem is that all of this origin point is also connected to me and my family and my ancestors. And what is that origin point? If we look at our Western narrative, And one reason why we might be able to say, how can white men stop being racist, or are white men prone to violence, is because we have an excessively racist, violent past. And so on the board, what is being cloaked from me, the viewer, right? The board is not discussing your life. The board is sharing my life. And it's revealing that there is a 0 point of knowledge, and that would be the origin of our Western society. So on the board here, I've put the names of various authors from all the way from Plato and Aristotle through Augustine, all the way up to the 16th, 17th century with Descartes and the mind-body split. And so that is the kind of jumping off point of being able to understand how did we end up becoming such a binarized society. And by the work of the decolonial scholars that I've studied with, we come to this point of seeing that modernity and coloniality are a worldview, or they were my worldview, and that they were continued. They were always on. And when we come to the 7 steps of transformation,